So today we are continuing our look at church, both as a place and a people. And so far we have seen church as people who are designed for worship, who are encouraged to be disciples, who are passionate about prayer, who are filled with the Spirit, who are part of God's family. And this week we're going to look at the church as people who share good news. We need to go on one. There we are. People who share good news. And normally when we're talking about witnessing or evangelism, you would expect the preacher to tell you to get out there and bash people with a Bible or something like that. Well, I'm not going to do that today. I want to look at it slightly differently today. We've been referring to a poem about the church. And the verse for today is about evangelism. It's about witnessing and church being people who do that. It talks about new people coming regularly. It talks about every month people coming to faith. There's a dynamic, an excitement and a growth about it. And it seems to me that in common with many churches in Scotland, that's a dynamic that we are missing. And so, that raises lots of questions. The early church had lots and lots of problems. When you read some of the letters that were written to different groups of Christians across the Mediterranean, lots of it is about false teaching that that's come into them and they've taken on. Others is about just wrong behavior and wrong attitudes. There are lots of things that they needed to put right. They were new to church, if you like, or new to Christian worship and witness, but they weren't new to worship. Most people in those days were used to the idea, at least, of worship. Most big cities had a temple. The Jews were used to the idea of worship. They had obviously seen God guide and lead them right through from Egypt into the promised land, through the tabernacle and then into the temple and so on. So they were used to going to the temple and being at the temple. They got that. And other people did the same, worshipping other gods. Sometimes it involved animal sacrifice. Sometimes it involved prostitution. Sometimes it involved hurting yourself. There was a whole range of different things, but people were used at least to the idea of going to worship. And the thing is that when somebody believes that and goes about putting it into practice, there are always people who can make money from it. You remember around the temple, and there's a story in Mark chapter 11, and Jesus went into the temple. And there was a thriving trade because folk who went to sacrifice at the temple didn't take the animals with them. They would buy animals when they got there, but the people who were there were cheating them. And they were making it difficult for people to get into the temple because of doing their business in the grounds of the temple. It's like having a Starbucks. For me, it would be like having a Starbucks at the front door. How would you get into church without actually having your coffee first? Yeah. Do we need to? Anyway, that's a different question. But they were stopping people getting to worship by conducting their business, and they were lying and cheating people and stopping them worshiping God. And so Jesus was so angry at what they were doing that he cleared them out. And then Paul upset the silversmiths in Ephesus, the people who were making little model images, idols of the goddess Artemis. And he caused uproar in Ephesus because people were becoming Christian and they were saying, well, we don't need that anymore. So there was an economic issue for folk, and they got so upset about it. But because people were used to worshipping, and they were used to worshipping in a particular way, when they became Christians, they didn't really know what they were supposed to do. And so they took on some of the practices that they had done before and simply substituted Jesus for whoever or whatever it was that they had been worshipping before. And so they had to learn how to do things differently, and what was appropriate and what wasn't appropriate in Christian worship. And so Paul writes, and various other people write to them to explain how to go about worshipping. In the beginning of the early church, a reading today was the day of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came and everything was changed. That first group of Christians, they were slightly different. They were Jews, so they were used to going to the temple, and they just kept going to the temple because, as far as they were concerned, they were still Jews. It was just that they worshipped Jesus. Jesus was a Jew, so it was perfectly okay for them to be in the temple, until eventually the Jews decided they weren't happy with that and kicked them out. But as far as they were concerned, that's what they did. So they just continued to practice worship in the temple. And their worship was different to what had gone before. Because when they went to worship, we read that God was there. God, through the apostles, performed miracles and signs and wonders. As they were praying and worshipping God together, things were happening that couldn't be explained in any way other than God was there. And then it affected their lifestyle and their behavior. When they left worshipping together, they were changed. And all of that together was attractive to people in Jerusalem. And so they came to find out what was going on. And as they came to find out what was going on, they were drawn into what was happening. And the more they were drawn into it, the more they were convinced that it was true. And they came to faith, and then they started to worship, and it was a kind of self-perpetuating cycle. It's not really like that for us. Now, please don't misunderstand me. God is at work in the church, because God is at work everywhere. And I've been in services where quite clearly God has spoken. And God has spoken to me. I've been in services where people have been healed. God is at work. But it's not like that. We've learned how to do church. And we've got it all nice and neatly ordered. Because certainly as Presbyterians, we need to do things decently and in order, don't you know? It's actually written down that we're supposed to. We've developed a style of worship that usually, speaking generally, we're fairly happy with. That's why we go to a particular congregation, because we're generally happy-ish with what goes on there during Sunday services. There are all sorts of debates in the church about musical styles, about Bible versions, about robes or jeans and everything in between, about Pentecostal or We Free and everything in between. We've got all of that stuff, but the truth is, all of that is man-made. And much of it is nonsense. Much of it doesn't matter at all. What actually matters is what is in the heart of the worshipper. I think we've missed a lot of what God has to say because we've been so busy keeping the order right. I don't want to focus on evangelism as telling others about Jesus, although, of course, that is a huge part of it, a vital part of it. But I think there are things that we can learn in terms of witnessing and evangelism from the worship. Quite like that one. In the passage that we read today, I think there are 4 things that we can learn from them. The first is that there were learning experiences in their worship. When they gathered together, there were things that they learned. And the first thing was that they preached the word. So on the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit comes, and Peter, in the midst of it all, stands up and preaches, and 3,000 people that day came to faith through that message. It started with preaching the word. And so we still preach, and preaching, I think, is important. It's Peter preached, and they say, what must I do to be saved? And they joined the church that day. So preaching is really proclamation. It's about Christian to non-Christian. It's telling people who Jesus is and what he's done and why they should believe it. Teaching is more Christian to Christian. They kind of go together. But generally speaking, Christian to Christian for teaching. And there are different ways to do that. There's Sunday morning, there's Bible studies, there's home groups, there's Alpha, there's blah, blah, blah. There's whole loads of ways of doing all of that. But it's to do with the Word, about hearing the Word and about speaking the Word and about learning the Word in different ways. And the call to spread the Word is heard right throughout the Bible in lots of different ways. Abraham was told to teach his household. Now, he couldn't teach about Jesus because he didn't know Jesus, but he taught what he knew. And then his household grew, and they were told that when it came to Moses, Moses was to speak, to write, and to read the words that God gave him for the people of God. And then the priests had a duty to teach the people what Moses had written down in the law. And then later on, the prophets applied the law to their own circumstance and situation at the time. And then wise men and women taught other people wisdom. And then in Jesus' day, he taught his disciples and he taught the people. And then the disciples taught other people what it meant to be a follower of Jesus and how to put their faith in him and to go on and to disciple them. And then today, there are people whose job it is to speak the truth in order to bring people to faith and to present them mature in Christ. But all of us have the responsibility of encouraging each other with the Word of God. So, what have we learnt as a congregation of God's people? Well, I think we have a mix of preaching and teaching from Sunday morning to what we do at Messy Church and to the gathering. From Young Church, they are learning something about the Bible and about God through there. Honest. Through to what we do at Prom Day as outreach, home groups, Alpha courses, the marriage course, the prayer course. It was really great. On Wednesday, we did something that I was a little bit uncomfortable with. But somebody there said, well, we tried this last week and we weren't sure about it, so I think we should try that this week. Wow, that is great. That's really encouraging. And so off we went, and it was great to see and to hear people taking steps of faith and trying something they'd never tried before. It was brilliant. And so we learn and we grow. And so, if you're not growing in faith, it's not because you've not got opportunities to learn. It's good that we have different people who get involved in leading worship and in teaching and in training and doing things. We can't simply expect new people to know and to understand what we do or what we believe. When people come into our congregation, they need to be taught. They need to be shown what it is to be Christian and how to live it out in practice. And then the second thing that we learn is that there were relational experiences. The early church ate together a lot. And for a number of reasons. First, it's good fellowship. It's a great way of getting to know somebody, to sit down and have food together. And it's not just about food. It's about relationship. And Jesus set the pattern. He spent lots of time with his friends, eating with them. And during that time together, he would teach them and he would speak to them and he would help them to understand what it meant to really follow him. It wasn't always comfortable. Because in Luke chapter 7, verses 36 to 50, there's a story when Jesus was invited to the Pharisees' house, to Simon's house, and they were all sitting around the table. And then, horror of horrors, a woman came in. And not just any old woman. It says she was a sinful woman. And she went to Jesus and she started to cry. And she washed his feet with her tears and with her hair. And this was just totally outrageous behavior. And everybody kind of looked and waited to see what would happen. And Jesus turned it into a teaching opportunity. And he said to Simon, do you see her? And what he actually meant was not, can you physically see her? You've got eyes, of course you can see her. What he meant was, do you understand who she is and what she has done? So even there, Jesus took that opportunity to encourage people to see differently and to come in faith. You might argue there's a cultural pattern to what they did, and in lots of other countries, eating is much more significant than it is for us. We tend to, in the West, have become a kind of fast food culture. We like McDonald's and other fast food outlets. We don't spend a lot of time sitting together and eating, really. And so you say, well, that's a cultural thing. It's not really for us. But actually, one of the things that we learned very early on through Alpha was that the bit that people enjoyed most was getting together to eat. And it was spending time just getting to know somebody else. And what they ate wasn't really that important. It was the time that was taken with them that was important. And for these folk, they would have spent time together in their pagan worship, and now they want to spend time together in Christian worship. And it's not just to get together. It was fellowship with a purpose. Because at these meals, they learned together, they talked together, they prayed together, they worshipped together, they did things together that encouraged their faith and helped them to grow as disciples of Jesus. And it's much easier to show somebody how to live and how to behave than to tell them. You get much better results by showing than by speaking. And some people have asked, why around our congregation do we now have much more food than we used to? And that's why. There's no other reason. That's why. It's because the getting to know people is really important. It's the spending time with somebody. It's the nurturing, caring, discipling thing that's important. And that's why we do it. Then thirdly, they experienced the presence of God when they came to worship. And as I said, I've been in small congregations. I've been in huge Christian events. I've been in places where God has quite clearly been at work, where God has spoken and God has done things. But it wasn't like they were experiencing. A lot of people sitting in churches in the West today would be wildly uncomfortable in that early church in Jerusalem. Because do you know what? God doesn't have a watch. God doesn't care if it's 12:15. I've been in many congregations where when it gets to about 5:02, folk begin to go. The thing is that God's not interested in time in the way that we are. He's interested in relationship. He's interested in getting to know you and me better. He doesn't really care what we wear to church. He doesn't really care what we sing. He doesn't really care which version of the Bible that we read. What he wants is our attention and our heart. God would quite happily mess up our order of service. Why? Well, because you can't program miracles. You can't program signs and wonders. You can't flick a switch and just have God speak. It takes time. Time to be with him. Time to listen. Time to respond. And if we're doing that, then we need to wait for his time and do it in his time. We're told that these Christians devoted themselves to prayer. You see, the more time that we spend in prayer, the better able we are to hear God speak. And the better we hear God speak, the more we can share with other people. And the better we pray and praise and worship. We do that on our own, and we do it together. And our leadership in that congregation of people who had spent time with Jesus. They had spent those years with him. They had walked with him. They had talked with him. They had seen him heal people. They had seen his prayer life. They had seen him walk on water. They had seen all of these things. They had seen him heal the sick and raise the dead and cast out demons. And so it was perfectly natural for them to go on and do what he had done. In fact, they had already experienced it themselves. Matthew chapter 10, verse 5 says, "These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. And as you go, proclaim this message: the kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give." At Pentecost, they freely received, and here they are now freely giving. Why? They had experienced it, they had known it, they had been taught it, they had been shown it. And so now they can go and put it into practice. And that's the kind of hard bit for us. Because we don't have that same experience. Prayer was a priority for them. And actually, the truth is, in Scotland, people don't really want to pray. Many churches are getting to the point where they're just not having a prayer meeting because folk don't come to pray. But if we're not praying, then we're not hearing from God. And if we're not hearing from God, then how can we expect to grow? It's a kind of circle. The preacher teaches, and people go and they say, "Oh, that was great," but they don't do anything with it. And then people don't see a difference between Christians and themselves. So why would you bother with church? So they don't come. Church, generally in Scotland, is dying. And then Christians bemoan the state that things have got to, so the preacher preaches harder. And people go, "Oh, that was great." And they don't do anything with it. But in our reading, it was the other way around. The preacher preached, and people went, "Oh, that's what I need to do. Right. Okay." The leadership performed signs and wonders. There was healing and prophecy and miracles and all that kind of stuff. And so people noticed both the miraculous and the personal transformation, and they were drawn to it. It was exciting, it was dynamic, it was good. And as they were drawn to it, as I said, they came to faith, and the process started over and over again. I think we've missed out on so much of what God has had for us as church because we are so blooming determined to do everything decently and in order. What we've done, actually, is to stifle the work of the Holy Spirit in us and through us. And we need to do something about it. We need to promote the place of prayer. It has been great to have folk coming on a Wednesday night to the prayer course. And there's been a real buzz, and it's been really exciting, and it's been good. I've really enjoyed it. But on Thursday morning, I was on my own. If we want to grow, we don't have the option. We don't have the luxury of doing what we've always done. Because it doesn't work. And I don't just mean us. I mean the church in the West. What we've done doesn't work. If it had been so good, if it had been so effective, we wouldn't be in 50 years of decline. But we are. And so we need to ask ourselves really significant questions. And I want to suggest that we also need to begin prayers that ask God to do miracles among us. I believe that God does do miracles. Absolutely believe that. But we need to be careful to get it right. So, for example, in 1 Corinthians 14, here's a prayer that I think we should be praying. Paul says to the Corinthians, follow the way of love and eagerly desire the gifts of the Spirit, especially prophecy. I think that's a real challenge. And then he goes on, but the one who prophesies speaks to people for their strengthening, encouraging, and comfort. Do you not want to be strengthened, encouraged, and comforted? Well, there Paul's telling you how to do it. Desire the gift of prophecy. The more we listen to God, the more he gives us words. And the more we actually then go and put that into practice and say to somebody maybe, I think God might be saying this. Does that make sense to you? And there's a real issue there. I know that. It's not easy. None of us want to go up to somebody and look like an idiot. I get that. But we've got to learn and we've got to try. Because there's something about that. There's something about allowing God to work and allowing God to speak that Paul talks about. And he's trying to compare the gift of tongues, which they were really into in Corinth, at the expense sometimes of everything else. And he's saying, well, that's great. It's a gift from God, and take it and use it and do it. That's wonderful. But what he says is this. In 1 Corinthians 14:23, if the whole church comes together and everyone speaks in tongues, that would be wonderful. But, he says, if inquirers or unbelievers come in, well, they not say that you're out of your mind. Because they've got no earthly idea what's happening. You look like a bunch of weirdos. But if an unbeliever or an inquirer comes in while everyone is prophesying, remember, we're encouraging and we're building up. They are convicted of sin and are brought under judgment as the secrets of their hearts are laid bare. As God gives prophets words to say to people, he's drawing them to himself. So they fall down and worship God, exclaiming, God is really among you. Do you know, I would like to be at many more services where we come away saying, whoa, God was really among us. The last thing is they experienced growth. It says in verse 47, the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. In other parts of the world, God is adding daily those who are being saved. The church is growing in South America and in Africa and in Asia. Even in Muslim countries where it's not legal to be Christian, the church is growing because God is at work in the world. And sometimes we forget that because our experience is different. The worship and the lifestyle of these early believers drew folk to Jesus. And the question is, does ours? Our history in Scotland, and certainly in our lifetime, is just one of decline. It has become normal to have our order, to have everything just so, to the point where people get so anxious and worried about having to serve communion just in case they get it wrong. You're passing bread and wine, but we get so upset with things that don't matter. Of course, we are doing lots of good things in the church, in our congregation and across Scotland. There's no doubt about that. Good things, relevant things, important things. But if we're honest, we could do better. So here's my last few questions. And I really want to address them to people who have families, but who don't go. The families don't go to church. My question is, why not? What has happened? Why are they not in church? You're here. Why are they not? And then, what would church need to be like in order to encourage them to come? What would we need to change? What about our order and our rules and things would we need to change to encourage those folk to come? And lastly, what can I do to make that happen? I think it's really important that we enjoy coming to worship. It's right and it's good and it's proper. But if it's not encouraging other people to come, then we really need to ask why. And we need to ask God what we're supposed to do. Because if it's not influencing and affecting other people, then we have to ask, is it really honoring Him? And if it's not honoring Him, we can't do it. Because it's wrong. So big questions. And I'm not saying I have any answers. That's the truth of the matter. But maybe as we learn to pray together and speak to God and listen to God, He'll show us.